Welcome back to Mercenary Star by William H. Keith Jr. We shall continue the saga of the beginnings of the Grey Death Legion. Chapter 7. Governor General Masayoshi Nagumo scowled at the image of Admiral Kodo on the comm screen. The time delay between Verthandi and Verthandi Alpha was less than 0.4 of a second, but twice that was needed to make the transmission and to receive the reply. The almost 1 second delay acted as an unwelcome drag on extended conversations. The worst part of it, Nagumo decided, was that he could not choose the moment at which to explosively interrupt a subordinate in mid-apology or explanation. Here was Kodo, for example, talking for almost a full second before Nagumo's acid, single-word commentary could cut off the Admiral's complaint about the low level of initiative and efficiency among the members of the Combine garrison stationed on Verthandi Alpha. The delay was a short one, but enough to irritate an already irritated Governor General. "The situation is not routine," Nagumo said, once Kodo had fallen silent. Around him, the Texan staff and the Regis Command Center also listened apprehensively. "I am gratified, at least, that you had enough daring and initiative to order a patrol to check out the intruder. That is, after all, the purpose of a blockade. Is it not?" The last words were thrust at Kodo's bald image like edged weapons. "Yes, my lord." Kodo was sweating heavily, the overhead fluoros in his office gleaming from his moist scalp. I felt it my duty to position our patrol with a heavy backup, to check the intruder carefully, and to be in position to block him from Verthandi just in case. He cannot possibly avoid us. "Good. You will take precautions that the intruder not be allowed closer than 70,000 kilometers to Verthandi. When it lands at Verthandi Alpha, I want your techs to take that ship apart if necessary to search for contraband or hidden passengers. The cargo is to be reloaded and transshipped here on one of our dropships. Understood?" "Yes, my lord." Nagumo nodded, but his scowl deepened. Kodo had proved himself incompetent in having only a single patrol, a Leopard class named Zhao, and 2 fighters, in a position where they could approach the intruder. 2 more fighters were in close orbit around Verthandi and could be deployed if the intruder broke free of the outer patrol and made a run for the planet. Other fighters in another dropship were being readied now at Verthandi Alpha base in case the intruder's object was a sneak raid on the planet's moon. Too many possibilities remained. The intruder should have been intercepted further from Verthandi, hours ago, when the blockading force had more options and more time to exercise them. At that point, the intruder would have been traveling at a higher speed, of course, and so more fuel would have been needed for an intercept. But certainly that was preferable to gambling all in the last handful of hours before the inbound missile hit Verthandi's atmosphere. The ships that were in place ought to be sufficient to handle the threat, but damn Kodo. Nagumo clenched his jaw. It was too late now for recriminations, nor could he choose a replacement for Kodo at the moment. "Very well," was all he said. "How long until visual contact is made?" "Patrol 19 has the intruder in sight, Lord. It will be another few minutes before they close enough to make out details. I'm putting all space defense forces on full alert. Maintain an open line to this office. I want to listen directly to the communications between your patrol and the intruder." "Yes, my lord." Minutes crawled. The intruder was approaching Verthandi from the system's zenith point to sunward and was now some 200,000 kilometers out, somewhat above the plane of the ecliptic. Verthandi Alpha was on the opposite side of Verthandi from the approaching dropship. Was that deliberate? Nagumo wondered. In any case, the intruder would have to be escorted past Verthandi and to a safe grounding on the moon. A voice half smothered in static cut through the command center. "What the hell is that thing?" The terminal screen of the tech seated in front of Nagumo glowed with the traceries of voice patterns and stress analysis. Quick flowing words of light identified the speaker as Lieutenant Kestrel Sirnan, pilot of the lead patrol fighter.
Other data showed vector, range, and scan data. The target itself appeared on another screen, relayed by the Shilone's onboard cameras to the dropship Zhao, and thence to receivers on Verthandi and Verthandi Alpha. I'm reading a normal scan, Lieutenant. Radar profile and computer ID make her to be a Union class, 3,500 tons. She could be one of ours. That voice was Smetnov, the wingman. Stress patterns flared. Though his voice was unnaturally calm, the instruments measuring the stress in his tone betrayed his fear. This, Nagumo had learned, was Smetnov's first active patrol sighting. I know what the computer says, pilot, Cernan replied. His voice was showing stress too, though it was well controlled. But she just doesn't feel right, somehow. Nagumo studied the TV image transmitted from Cernan's ship. The screen showed a dully reflective metallic globe, rust-streaked and worn. On one flank was the black-on-scarlet circled dragon, emblem of the Combine. Chinese ideographs picked out the vessel's name, Li Tao, and the name of her parent vessel, Qilong. A confusion of voices intruded on the radio link. Nagumo heard someone, a woman, he thought, speaking with rapid urgency, and then Kodo's bark, "Get her out of here!" "Kodo, what's going on?" The Admiral's voice came over the speaker. "Nothing, my lord. One of my junior officers chose an inappropriate moment to present a courier message." Sermon was right. The vessel didn't feel right. There was something missing. What? "What message?" Nagumo demanded. "My lord, it is nothing. Read it to me." "Oh." There was muttered sounds and confused background noises as the image of the intruder grew larger. What was odd about that vessel? There. It was difficult to see in the orange dim light of Norn, but the vessel was rotating slightly, and the play of shadow against the hull cried out to Nagumo's experienced eye. That dropship was no Union class. The particle projection cannons normally mounted on bow and flanks were missing. Paint had been artfully applied to imitate the weapon's shadows, but now that the ship had rolled, the angle of light made the disguise less convincing. There should be autocannons too, but the vessel had none. "My lord," Kodo's voice was urgent, "it's from one of our agents on Galatea. Report mercenary unit, probably an employee of rebels en route to Verthandi." "It's a trick," Nagumo shouted. "Relay commander, here, my authority. Attack the intruder." The fighter pilot had already arrived at the same conclusion. Long fractions of seconds before Nagumo's command could have reached him, his own order was heard at the command center. "Smetnov, overthrust, punch it!" The TV image was lost as the Shylone fighter wheeled and accelerated at grueling 4 Gs. Emergency! Cernan's voice was frantic now. "Flight 19 to base ship. Intruder is hostile. Repeat, hostile. Intruder now changing course to 003 Mark 5 at 2 Gs. Nagumo glanced up as the static hiss from the overhead speakers chopped off. "What's happening, damn it?" "Transmission interrupted," a tech said. "Contact lost with both elements of 19. Zhao confirms the intruder's new course." The tech glanced up at Nagumo, his face pale under the center's harsh lighting. "The intruder is accelerating toward Verthandi, Lord." Nagumo paused, considering. "Get me Colonel Kevlavik." Maybe the intruder could be stopped before it entered the atmosphere. If not, it would be up to Kevlavik to eliminate the danger as soon as the ship touched down on Verthandi's surface. "Mercenaries," he muttered inwardly. "Damnation." Grayson and the bridge crew of the Phobos had been listening in on the radio transmissions between the 2 Shylone fighters and their base ship. The transmissions were unintelligible without the computer codes that would unscramble an enemy's battle speech, but the sudden surge of emotion in the Draco pilot's voice had been unmistakable. The alarm had been sounded. Ilse Martinez glanced across at Grayson and, with a raising of her eyebrows, asked his permission to fire. "You may fire, Captain," he said with studied formality, and a lance of coherent light from the Phobos' single heavy laser gutted one of the Shylones. "Stand by for high-G maneuvers," Martinez said, her voice sharp but calm. Grayson scarcely had time to lower himself into an empty bridge observer's chair before the Phobos drives throbbed to a full 2 Gs. and our captain gave the orders that swung her into a new course. The damaged Gylone was out of the fight. The other was boosting at a back-breaking 4Gs, angling for maneuvering room. Missiles blossomed from the Phobos' missile bays in the next instant. 2 struck the accelerating fighter, disintegrating one wing and sending the craft off, powerless and tumbling end over end. Either or both fighters might still be in the fight, but their radios and radars were silenced, their power plants momentarily stilled. At 20 meters per second squared, the Phobos sped toward the swelling golden globe of Verthandi. Moments later, Martinez cut the ship's boost and the Phobos fell free, saving fuel against the maneuvers that would soon be necessary. Radar and imaging cameras showed the Leopard-class dropship, with a pair of fighters flanking her, now balanced on dazzling drive flares in an attempt to cut the Phobos off from Verthandi. The Leopard was already cutting between Phobos and the planet, in a position to anticipate her maneuvers. All Martinez could do was make those maneuvers unpredictable enough to keep the Combine dropship guessing. At a range of 90,000 kilometers, the Leopard-class vessel opened fire. The endless succession wars that had engulfed humanity for centuries had claimed many victims. One of the first was high level of technology required to manufacture the sophisticated electronic gear necessary to keep both warships and battle mechs in operation. Mankind had long ago lost the know-how to construct the comparatively simple computer chips needed to direct self-targeting and fire-and-forget Homer missiles, for example. Space battles now resembled the maneuver and the broadside exchanges of gunfire characteristic of the ancient age of sail more than they did battles of the 20th and 21st centuries. Missiles arced across intervening space along courses and at velocities set by heavier shipboard computers, aimed for predicted impact points. Would-be targets combined random bursts of powered flight or deceleration with free fall so that predicted impact points were always someplace other than where the missile actually exploded. The first enemy volley missed. The enemy dropship and its 2 tiny escorts, in close orbit now around Verthandi, passed around the curvature of the planet and out of sight. Verthandi's moon slowly settled behind the sweep of the planet's green-patched north pole as the Phobos dropped ever nearer. Grayson swam to the captain's console, weightless now as the Phobos drifted in unpowered freefall, her drive silent. "We'll need our screen out, Captain," he said. Martinez nodded. "Those fighters will try to close when they come around the planet's curve again," she said. "They'll try to pin us down to let the dropship move in and work us over at leisure. We can't let any of them get too close." Devik Eridan was clinging to a stanchion, looking deathly ill. Grayson did not particularly enjoy freefall, but he was not as badly affected by it as some. Combat, especially, could be rough on anyone not used to being shipboard during rough maneuvers. He swam across to Eridan's side. "Do you want to go below?" Eridan managed a greenish smile and shook his head. "Strange to talk about below when I seem to have lost my grip on up and down," he said. He belched once, heavily, and added, "I seem to have lost my grip on my stomach as well." "If you feel sick," Grayson warned, "leave the bridge. These people can't take the time to clean up after you." Eridan nodded and seemed to make an effort to collect himself. "What's happening now? What's the captain doing?" Grayson glanced across at Martinez, who was speaking with steady urgency into a microphone at her console. "We're dropping our pups, the 2 Chippewa fighters we brought on board at Galatea. We'll need them to screen us from Combine fighters. We're releasing them while the enemy blockading vessels are hidden on the other side of the planet, along with the planet's moon. We're probably under observation from the ground, so what we're doing won't be much of a surprise. You never know, though. Every little bit, they say." And the enemy dropship I heard them talking about?" Grayson shook his head. "We'll have to wait and see about that one. It's going to be a squeaker, though." He raised one eyebrow. "So much for the non-existent blockade, citizen." I don't understand. They haven't been this vigilant." "You've been away for a while, or maybe it was just bad luck that we ran into their patrol." Will we get through?" Grayson looked across the deck toward the bridge view screen, which showed the bulk of the planet, whose golden light now flooded the crowded bridge. Well, citizen, I guess we'll find out in a few minutes. When the Combine ships emerged again from behind the planet, they would strike. Sue Ellen Klein was wedged so tightly into the narrow cockpit of her Chippewa that she could scarcely move, but it was times like this when she felt most free and alive. The Chippewa was large for a fighter, massing 90 tons, yet most of that was in the broad, knife-lean wing body of the craft. The cockpit was perched at the wing center, between the aft-jutting boom-joint double tail. From that vantage point, the pilot had an unobstructed view of glory through the transplex cockpit bubble. The stars crowded close, and the golden light of Verthandi bathed Sue Ellen's face when she unsealed and raised the visor of her helmet. The wing body of Jeffrick Sherman's Chippewa glittered sharp and bright across the stars a kilometer distant. She knew, too, that the Phobos was again balanced on white fire, decelerating at over 2 Gs aft and beneath the sweep of her own wing. The two fighters had been launched while at a higher intrinsic velocity, which was carrying them now beyond the Phobos and deeper into Verthandi's gravitational field. Instruments strained to glean tidbits of data from random noise, of the multitude of probabilities spilling across the computer screen, which would be the vector of the enemy ships when they reappeared on the Chippewa's scanners. Which one would it be? Klein opened a ship-to-ship direct beam microwave channel. It allowed short-range communications for coordinating fighter maneuvers without letting the enemy listen in. Chip 1 to Chip 2, she said. It was cold in her cockpit. The life support systems were deliberately kept at a low setting to conserve power that would be needed later. Besides that, the Chippewa's problem would soon be too much heat, not too little. Sue Ellen's breath puffed in wispy clouds before her face. Go ahead, 1. In position. Keep alert, love. Right. Watch it, though. We're still pretty close to the Phobos. We may be monitored. The hell with them, she said. If that bastard wants to eavesdrop, he's welcome. She said it loudly but deliberately, and when no third voice came across the comm, she giggled. I think we're safe, darling, but really going to have to stop meeting like this. I'll go along with you there. I'd rather meet you in a nice warm bed with a bottle of Chateau d'Avion 09. This gives us more privacy than we had on the Phobos, but I'm afraid it still leaves a little something to be desired. Well, I'll tell you. When we get back to the Phobos, we'll open up the watch standards bunk room on the fighter bay level and we'll hold it to bogies, recorders on. There was a breathless moment. Then she heard 2 enemy fighters vectoring low across the planet. Jumping hell, they must be skimming atmosphere. Her own instruments showed the same story. Close-paired Kurita fighters angling up from Verthandi's atmosphere. Her onboard computer cycled through scanner data and sketched out the ID schematics. They were SL-15 Slayers, delta-winged and sleek, each massing 80 tons and carrying 6 medium lasers and a heavy autocannon apiece. Slayers were deadly at close combat, fully capable of shredding her heavier Chippewa in a single pass. A long-range comm channel opened. Phobos to pups. The voice said, Bandit Slayers vectoring toward Phobos, bearing 349er Mark II. Intercept and... Klein cut the power off with a savage clap on the power switch, but kept her ship-to-ship microwave channel open. Arming weapons, she said, then brought the visor down across her face and sealed it. A touch of a switch brought her fighter's heads-up display into glowing brightness, an arm's length before her eyes. Arming weapons, Jeffrick replied. Luck, my love. Luck. Blood sang in her ears with the racing of her pulse. She lived. That exhilaration was edged with fear that something might happen to Jeff. As always, she managed to dismiss the thought. Even then, the memory of her brother crowded to the fore. Alec, she shook her head, inwardly commanding herself. No. Instead, she gave in to the raw, consuming passion of coming battle. Personal extinction, the memory of Alec, the possibility of the death of her lover, all were unthinkable with the surge of battle in heart and hands, with the senses so alive, so charged with excitement. Even the sweet thrill of sex paled by comparison. Her instrument panel flashed red. Warning, the enemy had fired, but missed. The Chippewa was not nearly as heavily armored as the Slayer, but the weapons mounted in its broad wings more than made up for it. A pair of light lasers guarded aft, 6 medium and heavy lasers aimed forward, and the space between the pilot's feet extended into the nose containing bundles of short and long-range missiles. At a range of 20,000 kilometers, Sue Ellen triggered a spread of SRMs, then punched her Plasma Star 270 drive into throbbing life. Jeff's drives flared blue-white in almost the same instant. The miniature suns of missile drives intertwined into the distance against Verthandi's growing disk. With her eyes locked on the readings of her HUD display, Klein counted off seconds, then flipped her Chippewa end to end. 5 Gs crushed her into her seat, the roar of the drive hammering through her vessel's hull to pound and claw at her body through the padded seat. The maneuver was precisely timed. Her Chippewa fell tail first past the approaching Slayers, then accelerated after them with rapidly compounding speed. Missiles laced the sky with burning traceries. A hit flooded her cockpit with silent white light that polarized her helmet visor black. "Sue, I got one!" Jeff's voice over the microwave channel was ragged with excitement. "He's still kicking," she replied. Her heads-up display pinpointed the damaged Slayer, tumbling out of control, but struggling to regain flight attitude with its control thrusters. She locked onto the target and triggered her fighter's heavy wing-mounted lasers in rapid succession. Spectroscopic scanners told of metal vapor boiling into space. She fired her own thrusters again to align her craft for another shot. "Sue, more company, planetward 355 Mark II. "Damn," she cursed as she glanced from Doppler radar to computer ID and then caught her lower lip between her teeth. There were 2 more SL-15s climbing out of Verthandi's atmosphere. They must have been waiting for just such an opportunity to catch the Legion's fighter screen between the 2 halves of their forces. It was a trap. "They're boxing us, Jeff. We'll have to bull past the first 2 and close with the Phobos. Affirmative. Punch it." The Chippewas had drifted apart by several hundred kilometers in the brief fight. They swung now to align with the distance-dimmed flare of the Phobos' drive. Just 1 Slayer drew across Klein's HUD sights, lasers scorching hits along her starboard wing. Flakes of paint and metal glittered in the sunlight, streaming aft in a metallic cascade as she continued to accelerate. She checked Jeff's position quickly. He was under drive, slipping past the dead hulk of the Slayer they had already killed, angling for a deflection shot at the Slayer that was attacking her. She triggered another salvo of missiles and another burst of laser fire. The heat in the cockpit was already beginning to penetrate her suit, and she was slick with sweat. A fighter's biggest problem in combat was excess heat, and every thruster burn, every discharge of laser or missile added to the problem. Sue Ellen ignored the growing discomfort, held stock still as her Chippewa closed on the target with agonizing slowness, then shrieked victory as her lasers scorched multiple hits on the enemy's charred and scored armor plate. The Slayer's thrusters fired frantically, knocking the damaged ship onto a new course. Seconds later, Sue's Chippewa plowed through the expanding cloud of paint chips and solidified droplets of recently vaporized metal from the enemy ship. A hit a moment before. Thousands of tiny, high-speed impacts sounded against her hull like flung handful of gravel. The target was aft now, boosting planetward at high G. Nothing but the rain, huh? Where was Jeff? She ignored the fireworks cascade across her HUD scanner display. Her instruments were temporarily blinded by the cloud of debris and would not be reliable for several seconds. Instead, she craned her neck, searching the black sky until she saw a moving glitter of light reflected from what might have been Jeff's wing surface. If it weren't Jeff's Chippewa, then it was the first enemy Slayer, now dead and drifting in the sunlight. That first Slayer was not dead, only damaged. Alive and cunning, its pilot watched Jeffrey Sherman's Chippewa drift across his own HUD at point-blank range. The Slayer's main drive was out. His life support was failing. but he still had a positive power feed to his lasers, and his autocannon was loaded and ready. The pilot's name was Raul de Silva, and he'd long dreamed of being a great aerospace fighter ace among House Kurita's legions. The fact that he hadn't yet scored his first kill had never dimmed that dream. Now, though, the possibility that he might die over Verthandi without even knowing victory in ship-to-ship combat filled him with an infinite sense of loss and loneliness. He had killed before, but somehow the helpless rebel vehicles, the village buildings, the streaming rabble fleeing from burning Verthandian towns had never seemed more than impersonal targets, like holographic shadows in a flight combat simulator. What Raul had dreamed of was the glory of fighter pilot facing fighter pilot, two keen minds in deadly contest. His ship was ruined and would not make atmosphere again. Of that, Raul was certain. If the intruders could be destroyed, there was still a good chance his comrades could rescue him. Once the intruder dropship was dead, the nearby Xao would mount a search for survivors. Unless Raul could take the enemy out now, he would drift forever to Metal Tomb, growing colder and colder. His last hours would become a contest between cold and suffocation for the privilege of ending Raul's short life. Providence had arranged that he could still strike back. If luck was with him, he might yet kill one of the intruder fighters, and might even survive to fight again another day. If luck was not with him, he would die, but knowing he had scored at least one kill, man to man. He made a minute adjustment. His slayer rolled slightly, long shadows from torn metal falling across the curved armor of the ship's nose. The Chippewa was less than a kilometer away, large in his HUD crosshairs. Raul's hand closed on the firing switch. All 5 forward-mounted lasers triggered in a salvo that sliced through the Chippewa's armor like hot wires through butter. The Combine pilot added his autocannon to the barrage, a steady stream of explosive shells shredding the control and port wing surfaces of the stricken enemy craft. Raul's lips were drawn back from his teeth in a fierce berserker's grin, his yell of triumph deafening inside the confines of the Slayer's cockpit. Sue Ellen Klein's victory shout became a wail of anguish. Her Chippewa's hull creaked protest as she piled on G's in an attempt to change course, to kill her own velocity and swing into a new intercept vector. Jeff was maneuvering too, his drive flaring against the trailing cloud of debris from his ship's wounds. The target fell into the crosshairs, still firing, savaging Jeff's Chippewa with repeated hits. Missiles launched across space. One struck the Slayer squarely just behind its cockpit. Transplast melted in SAR surface heat. The Slayer began tumbling, broken pieces of instrumentation and armor trailing from the gaping wound of the stricken ship's cockpit. Also tumbling was Jeff's Chippewa, moving outbound away from Verthandi. It took Sue Ellen a few precious minutes to close with Jeff's ship, matching course and speed. What she saw sickened her. The Chippewa's cockpit appeared intact, but the portside wing was nearly torn away. The starboard wing was holed in 5 places, and most of Jeff's stabilizer had been torn away. A spaghetti tangle of conduit tubing and wiring, hydraulic piping, and shredded armor plate trailed after the fighter, creating a ghastly image of disembowelment. A ring of dust-fine debris, water vapor, and leaking atmosphere condensing and freezing in the vacuum of space expanded outward from the wreckage. She knew that ship would never make a controlled entry into atmosphere again. Her maneuver had taken her out of the direct line between the Phobos and the Slayers. All 3 surviving SL-15s seemed to be ignoring her and were closing on the dropship instead. Frantic now, but dulled by worry and the sudden dwindling of her battle fever, she tried to raise Jeff ship to ship. "I'm here," he said. "I'm okay. Some leakage, but I'm not hurt too badly. The controls are gone, though, and so is the power. The old girl has had it, I'm afraid." No, Jeff, blow your hatch. I'll make pickup." She began struggling with her harness. The cockpit of the Chippewa was crowded with 1. With 2, it would be claustrophobic. But at least the 2 of them would make it back to the Phobos. There was a long silence before Sherman replied. I don't think so, hun. My legs, they're hurt. Not bad, but there's no pain, but my pressure suit is pretty badly torn up down there. There was another pause, and then a sob came across their comm channel. Oh God, Sue, it's starting to hurt. Fire control, Captain Martinez had to yell to be heard above the roar reverberating through that ship. Her nav screen showed twisted trails of light marking the incoming paths of the Kurita Slayers. Autocannon shells hosed across the Phobos' hulls, their explosions cratering armor and opening savage gashes. Fire control released to weapon stations. Fire at will. Missiles arced into blackness, seeking the glitter of the dropship's minute attackers. Lasers burned briefly, invisibly, probing those spots where computers linked to the Phobos' scanners predicted that the 3 SL-15s should be. Occasionally, those predictions might be correct. The wing of one Slayer glowed white-hot when the Phobos' heavy laser struck it. Droplets of molten armor streamed into space, a brief-lived contrail of dancing sparks. All 3 Delta fighters streaked by the Phobos at high speed, lasers carving into the dropship's hull as they passed. The Phobos' weapons replied, tracking the fighters, scoring hits, but none were fatal. All 3 Slayers end-overed, and their drives burned white-hot as they decelerated, lining up for another pass. Martinez turned on Grayson. We're taking too much damage, Major. She gestured toward the main view screen, where Verthandi loomed huge. Another pass or two by those people, we might not survive re-entry. If we accelerate now, we could outdistance them, maybe loop around the planet and make it back to the zenith point. Grayson allowed a half smile. What for? The Invidious jumped out as soon as she recharged. But another starship might jump in. Any ships coming in system are going to be Combine vessels, Captain. Or do you want to go ahead and surrender now? I'm stating options, Major. Martinez dropped her voice so low that Grayson could scarcely hear. At this point, surrender might not be such a bad idea. Grayson shook his head. Plot your course, Captain. Grounding in the Azure Sea, at the coordinates Citizen Iridun gave you. I prefer to take my chances with your piloting than the Combine's mercy. Yes, sir. Martinez had not called him that before. The word sounded strange on her lips. Captain, the comm officer looked up from his console. Captain Martinez, I've got a distress beacon from one of the Chippewas. She turned from Grayson. Damn, where? Planetward, close in. I've got voice. Put it on speaker. Phobos, this is Chip 1. Klein's voice was faint, distorted by the hash of static and distance. Come in, Phobos. Martinez picked up the mic from her console. Phobos here. Phobos, Jeff's been hit. Home on the beacon transmission and pick us up. If you can manage rendezvous, we can save him. Martinez looked at Grayson, eyebrows raised, the skin taut under the blue wing tattoos. Grayson looked from her to the nav screen. The fighters were outbound, but slowing. In hours, Verthandi's gravity would drag them to a halt, would drag them into the long fall back. Pickup would be possible, of course. It would take long hours more for the crippled Chippewa to fall into Verthandi's atmosphere. But what would be happening in the meantime? The Leopard dropship was already emerging from behind Verthandi's horizon, closer to the Chippewas than the Chippewas were to Phobos. The Phobos might make it past the enemy dropship if she could maintain her present speed and course toward the planet, not decelerating until the final plunge into Verthandi's atmosphere. But the Chippewas were on another vector, outbound. To match course and speed with them? Grayson balanced the life of one wounded fighter pilot against the lives of all aboard the Phobos. No longer was it a question of mission. This was sheer survival. He gestured toward the microphone, and Martinez handed it to him. He took a deep breath, held the device to his lips, and spoke. Chip 1, this is Carlisle. Phobos cannot rendezvous. Do you understand? We cannot make pickup on Chip 2. He's dying. You can't leave us. Chip 1, this is an order. Grayson had not believed the words would hurt so much. He scarcely knew Klein and Sherman, but the pain was knife-sharp. Abandon Chip 2 and return to Phobos. The enemy dropship is shaping an intercept orbit and we must meet her. Do you copy? Carlisle, damn you! You can't do this to us. Lieutenant Klein, there's nothing you can do for him. Return to Phobos and take your station. I'll tell you what you can do with your damn station. I'll see you in hell, Grayson Carlisle. In hell. As if to underscore her words, the Phobos' hull rang anew with the impact and thundering bellow of autocannon rounds. Somewhere, far down the curve of the dropship's hull, a storage compartment had been breached, its atmosphere erupting explosively into vacuum. The Deltaform SL-15s passed again. The Phobos' lasers sought and found. The drive of one stuttered and winked out at the touch of 3 beams sweeping across it after hull. The craft began a slow tumble into darkness. Now it was the Leopard bearing down, driving toward the Phobos at 3 Gs. LRM struck her lower hull, rupturing a mech storage bay, smashing a starboard laser turret. The bay door blew out into space, winking off and on as it dwindled into the black. The Phobos' missiles swarmed back along the same path. Laser beams, visible only on the bridge's combat screens as lances of green and red, stabbed, probed, and struck. From somewhere, an alarm shrilled, but the sound was dull behind the babble of voices of the bridge crew. A computer voice announced pressure loss in compartment 3. Martinez looked up from her console. Better take your seat, Major, she said. We're committed, and here's where things get rough. Grayson strapped himself into his observer's chair. Events were beyond his control now, which gave him a moment to spare a thought for the 2 Chippewa pilots. Could he have done anything differently? If the Phobos had rendezvoused with Jeffrey Sherman's fighter, all of them would have died. Or they would have been forced to surrender. Computer imaging showed the Leopard huge on the main screen. A pair of now familiar delta shapes streaked past the larger form, those slayers closing for another run. Somewhere, a voice recited range figures for a fire control station. 900800700 was the voice of a computer, or was it the unnaturally calm voice of a trained professional rising above the surge of emotions, of pain, and of fear? Surrender was unthinkable. Possibly, in a declared war with established sides, the Grey Death Legion might have considered it in hopes of being exchanged or pledged. Mercenaries aiding a rebellion on a world already conquered by the Draconis Combine was a different matter altogether. The Draco's simplest solution would be to arrange for the entire unit to quietly vanish. Besides, these Combine forces fought under the banner of Duke Hasid Rykal, the Red Duke, mastermind of the plot that had resulted in the death of Grayson's father. How could he ever quietly surrender, knowing there was a chance to strike at Rykal, to attack him, to hurt him? Grayson's will to vengeance was not yet dead, but he had abandoned Jeffrey Sherman to die. Where was right in all of this? The Phobos bucked wildly. The noise of atmosphere rose outside, a distant susurration that built and surged, then built again into an overwhelming roar. Targets incoming, someone's voice rose above the roar, sharp with new fear. Bearing 050, Mark 10, high, he's coming in. As the dropship plunged deeper into the thickening atmosphere, it met this new attack with concentrated laser fire. The Slayer's massive nose and belly armor absorbed most of the onslaught as its own lasers sliced into the pocked and cratered target, growing large in its pilot's sights. One laser struck the Slayer full in the cockpit, a range too short to allow polarization of the canopy to rob the beam of more than a fraction of its strength. The fighter's cockpit turned brilliant under the beam's megajoule caress. The canopy fragmented, giving the pilot no time to scream or even comprehend before his body transformed into superheated vapor. Though the Slayer pilot was dead, his fighter bore on at 3 kilometers per second, a gaping scar now glowing red across its upper hull. The impact caught the Phobos a glancing blow. but it was enough to stagger the larger ship and to lay open its fuel tanks in a ragged gash across the ship's flank. The wreckage of the dead Slayer sprayed outward in a final blossoming of destructive brilliance that kicked the Phobos forward and down. The jolt sent the bridge crew reeling against consoles or lurching against the restraining straps of their harnesses as lights failed and damage alarms shrilled. The ionization shell of re-entry flickered wildly about the stricken, helpless dropship as it plunged and rolled uncontrollably toward the planet below.
And that, my friends, ends these chapters of The Mercenary Star